There are some children who are born to be children, and others who are born to be everything else, and Frances Ethel Gumm never stood a chance of being the first. She entered the world on June 10, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. But her childhood was over before her second birthday, not because of tragedy or loss, but because her mother Ethel had dreams that were bigger than their small town could contain, and Frances's voice was the key that would unlock them. Most mothers sing lullabies to help their babies sleep. Ethel sang to Frances to teach her how to perform. Frank Gumm, Frances's father, managed the new Grand Theater with the gentle efficiency of a man who understood that entertainment was supposed to bring joy, not consume it. He loved his youngest daughter with the protective tenderness that fathers are meant to provide. But even his love couldn't shield Frances from the momentum that Ethel was building around their baby girl's extraordinary voice. By the time Frances was 2, she was already walking onto stages that were taller than she was. Her tiny voice filling spaces meant for much older performers. The audiences at the new Grand Theater found her performances charming, precisely because they came from someone so impossibly young. They didn't understand that what they were witnessing wasn't natural childhood expression, but learned behavior that had been carefully cultivated and reinforced. Frances was learning that love came with conditions, and the primary condition was making other people happy. When she sang, the adults around her lit up with pride and excitement. When she resisted or showed signs of normal childhood stubbornness, their disappointment was immediate and devastating to her developing sense of self-worth. She learned to read their faces before she learned to read books, to gauge their moods before she understood her own. This wasn't presented as exploitation, it was celebrated as exceptional talent being nurtured by loving parents. But what nobody recognized was how quickly a toddler could learn to separate her authentic feelings from her performed emotions, and how dangerous that separation would become as she grew older. When Frances was 4, the Gumm family made the decision that would reshape everything about her life. They left Minnesota for California, joining the thousands of families who migrated west with dreams of Hollywood success. Unlike most of those families, they found what they were looking for, but what they found would prove to be more complicated than any of them had imagined. The Gumm sisters, Frances, and her older sisters, Mary Jane and Dorothy Virginia, quickly established themselves in the Los Angeles entertainment scene. Frances' voice had a quality that made talent scouts and industry professionals stop whatever they were doing to listen. It carried emotional weight that seemed impossible for someone her age to possess, a maturity that suggested experiences far beyond what any child should have accumulated. But this wasn't the result of some mystical gift. It was the product of a child who had learned to access and perform feelings that weren't naturally hers yet. By age 10, Frances was performing regularly on radio shows and in venues across Los Angeles. To outsiders, she seemed like a remarkably poised and gifted child who was living every little girl's dream of stardom and recognition. Behind the scenes, she was learning lessons that would shape the rest of her life in ways that nobody intended but everyone enabled. She learned that being tired, hungry, or emotionally overwhelmed were problems to be managed rather than needs to be addressed. She learned that the adults in her life were most satisfied when she was performing, and that their satisfaction was more important than her own comfort or desires. Most critically, she learned that her value as a person was directly tied to her ability to entertain others. The transformation that would seal her fate began in 1934, when 12-year-old Frances was signed to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, one of the most powerful studios in Hollywood. This should have been the realization of every family's dream. A small-town girl with extraordinary talent getting her chance at movie stardom. Newspapers wrote about her signing as if she had won some cosmic lottery. Her photograph appeared in magazines, alongside stories about her wholesome background and natural, unspoiled charm. But what nobody wrote about was what it actually meant for a 12-year-old to be legally owned by a massive corporation. MGM didn't just hire Frances, they completely redesigned her identity. They changed her name to Judy Garland, because Frances Gumm didn't sound like someone who belonged in movie credits. They altered her appearance, her mannerisms, her daily schedule, and eventually they would fundamentally change her body's chemistry. At 12, she accepted all of these changes without question, because she had already spent a decade learning that her personal preferences were less important than other people's business decisions. The studio system of the 1930s was built on total control, and nowhere was that control more absolute than in their management of young performers. Judy's formal education became secondary to her filming schedule, handled by tutors between takes when production demands allowed time for it. Her social development occurred entirely under studio supervision, surrounded by adults whose primary concern was her productivity and profitability. Her emotional and psychological needs were addressed only when they threatened to interfere with her work performance or the studio's investment in her future earning potential. When she turned 13, MGM introduced her to what they called health supplements, amphetamines, to maintain her energy during 18-hour filming days, and barbiturates to ensure she could sleep when the work was finally completed. The studio physicians who prescribed these medications presented them as necessary medical support for the demanding physical requirements of her career. They used clinical terminology that made the routine sound professional and beneficial rather than what it actually was: chemical manipulation of a developing child's brain and body. A 13-year-old's nervous system doesn't distinguish between legitimate medical treatment and systematic drug administration. It simply adapts to whatever becomes the daily norm. By the time Judy was 15, her natural sleep cycles, appetite regulation, energy patterns, and emotional responses had all been chemically overridden in ways that seemed manageable in the immediate term, but would prove catastrophic over the course of her lifetime. This was her state of being when she recorded Over the Rainbow for the movie that would make her a global icon. The song was nearly eliminated from The Wizard of Oz because studio executives worried that it would slow the film's pacing and bore younger audiences. They didn't understand that what they were hearing in Judy's voice wasn't just technical proficiency, it was genuine longing, expressed by someone who was beginning to comprehend that her own dreams would always be subordinate to everyone else's plans for her. When audiences heard Dorothy sing about birds flying over the rainbow and wonder why she couldn't follow them, they were listening to Judy's real feelings about freedom, choice, and the possibility of a life that might actually belong to her. But that authenticity in her performance also created expectations that would imprison her for the rest of her career. America fell completely in love with Dorothy's innocence, optimism, and trust. Studio executives ensured that Judy's public image never deviated from those qualities, even as her real experiences became increasingly distant from anything Dorothy would have recognized or understood. When journalists interviewed her, studio representatives were always present to redirect conversations away from topics that might disturb the carefully constructed illusion of perpetual youthful happiness that had become Judy's professional brand. The distance between who she was expected to be in public and who she was becoming in private grew wider with each passing year. Behind the cameras and away from the press, the medications were becoming central to her basic ability to function in daily life. Without amphetamines, she couldn't generate the energy levels that her work schedule demanded. Without barbiturates, she couldn't achieve sleep despite the overstimulation and anxiety that constant performance created. Without appetite suppressants, she couldn't maintain the specific weight that cameras and costumes required. By 17, Judy's body had completely forgotten how to regulate any of these functions independently, but this was never framed as a medical problem, just as a necessary aspect of her professional life that she needed to accept and manage. When she occasionally questioned the routine or requested modifications to her schedule, she was reminded of the broader ecosystem that depended on her cooperation. The studio employed hundreds of people whose livelihoods were connected to her films. The theaters that screened her movies supported thousands more workers. The audiences who bought tickets were counting on her to provide the entertainment they needed for escape and joy. Her family's financial security had become entirely dependent on her continued success and willingness to comply with studio requirements and expectations. The weight of all these dependencies meant that her personal struggles, health concerns, and emotional needs were always framed as secondary to her professional obligations and the greater good that her work supposedly served. At 18, Judy discovered that she was trapped in an impossible professional contradiction. She was considered too mature to continue playing the innocent characters that had made her famous, but too young to be taken seriously for more sophisticated dramatic roles. This left her suspended in a career limbo where she was expected to maintain the enthusiasm and optimism of a child while shouldering responsibilities that would overwhelm most experienced adults. The medications that had once helped her meet seemingly impossible demands were now making those demands even more difficult to fulfill consistently and professionally. Her weight fluctuated unpredictably as her metabolism struggled to function normally after years of pharmaceutical manipulation. Her sleep patterns remained chaotic, making it nearly impossible to maintain the consistency and reliability that film production schedules required. Her emotional responses became increasingly unpredictable as the drugs that had once managed her feelings began losing their effectiveness over time. What happened in 1941 would expose the true extent of the damage that had been inflicted on her basic relationship with her own body and mind. When Judy was 19, she experienced what the studio carefully termed a nervous breakdown, though the official public explanation was that she had contracted influenza and required extended rest for recovery. During her hospitalization, she attempted to discontinue the medications that had controlled every aspect of her daily existence for 6 consecutive years. The withdrawal process was far more devastating than anyone had anticipated or prepared for. Her body had entirely forgotten how to regulate sleep, energy, and appetite without pharmaceutical assistance. Her nervous system, which had been chemically managed since early adolescence, struggled to function independently. Her emotions, which had been suppressed and controlled for so long, returned with overwhelming intensity and without any natural coping mechanisms to process or contain them. After several weeks of suffering, the studio physicians convinced her that resuming the medication routine was essential for her physical safety and psychological stability. This was the moment when Judy began to understand that she wasn't just contractually obligated to MGM. She was physiologically dependent on them in ways that made any form of genuine independence seem impossible. The medications weren't just managing her career performance anymore. They were managing her basic capacity to exist and function in the world. When she returned to work, something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with performing, though it would take years for the full implications of that change to become apparent. The spontaneous joy and natural timing that had made her early performances so magical now required conscious effort and deliberate technique to access and maintain. The instinctive emotional connection that had made her voice so compelling was replaced by a more calculated, studied approach to her craft. She was still extraordinarily talented, but the source and nature of that talent had been fundamentally altered by forces entirely beyond her control. Her personal relationships began to deteriorate as the boundary between her public persona and private identity became increasingly difficult to locate and maintain. She married David Rose in 1941, hoping that marriage might provide some stability and normalcy within her otherwise chaotic existence. But the relationship lasted only 2 years, ending when the relentless demands of her career made normal domestic rhythms impossible to establish or sustain. Her daily schedule was determined by studio executives who had no incentive to consider her husband's needs, her own desires for privacy and intimacy, or the basic requirements of a healthy marriage. During this period, she began to understand that fame hadn't expanded her life choices. It had systematically eliminated most of them. The constant pressure to maintain her public image meant that she couldn't express frustration, exhaustion, or unhappiness without risking her career and the financial security of everyone who depended on her success. The studio's enormous investment in her commercial potential meant that her personal struggles and health concerns would always be treated as secondary to their business interests and profit margins. The public's emotional investment in her wholesome, optimistic image meant that any signs of genuine human complexity, struggle, or growth had to be carefully concealed from view. By her mid-20s, Judy had been performing professionally for over 20 years. She had never held a regular job, never lived independently, never made a significant life decision without first considering how it would impact her career trajectory and public image. She had never developed the practical life skills, emotional coping strategies, and independent decision-making abilities that most people acquire gradually during their teenage years and early adulthood. But rather than being completely destroyed by these circumstances, something unexpected and remarkable began to happen. Judy started to transform her accumulated pain, isolation, and emotional deprivation into a source of artistic power that was unlike anything Hollywood had ever witnessed or produced. Her performances in the late 1940s and early 1950s contained an emotional depth, authenticity, and raw honesty that couldn't be taught in acting classes, manufactured by studio techniques, or replicated by other performers. She had learned to access genuine human suffering and alchemize it into something that could touch other people's hearts in profound and lasting ways. A Star is Born in 1954 showcased this evolved artistry in a manner that completely shocked audiences who had only known her as the girl who sang about rainbows and yellow brick roads. Her performance as Vicky Lester was raw, honest, and heartbreaking in ways that her earlier work had never approached or suggested. For the first time in her career, she was playing a character whose struggles, disappointments, and battles with the entertainment industry directly resembled her own lived experiences. The authenticity of her portrayal was both magnificent to witness and terrifying to contemplate. The film achieved critical acclaim and demonstrated her evolution as a serious dramatic actress, but it also made visible the tremendous personal cost that her years of controlled, managed living had exacted on her physical health and emotional well-being. Her marriage to director Vincente Minnelli had ended in divorce, despite producing a daughter, Liza, who would inherit both her mother's extraordinary talent and some of her complicated, ambivalent relationship with the entertainment industry and public attention. Judy's ongoing conflicts with the studio system had become increasingly adversarial and public as she fought for basic creative control, financial fairness, and some measure of human autonomy in her professional life. The medications that had once enabled her to meet impossible professional demands were now making those same demands even more difficult to fulfill consistently and reliably. In 1950, MGM terminated her contract after 18 years of continuous service and unprecedented profitability for the studio. The official statement described the separation as a mutual decision that would allow her to pursue more diverse artistic opportunities and greater creative freedom. The reality was that she had become too unpredictable, too expensive, and too complicated for a system that valued efficiency, control, and predictable profit margins above all other considerations. For the first time since she was 12 years old, Judy found herself unemployed and uncertain about her professional future and financial security. This period of professional rejection and uncertainty coincided with a personal crisis that would define and constrain the remaining years of her life. Without the rigid structure that the studio system had provided, she struggled to create healthy routines, boundaries, and support systems for herself. The fundamental life skills that most adults develop naturally and gradually, financial planning, relationship maintenance, emotional regulation, self-care, independent decision-making, had never been part of her education or experience. She began performing in nightclubs and concert halls, rediscovering the immediate, intimate connection with live audiences that had been largely absent during her years of film work. These performances revealed something that the controlled, artificial environment of movie sets had obscured and suppressed, Judy had evolved into an artist capable of channeling universal human experiences through her voice and physical presence in ways that transcended typical entertainment boundaries and touched something essential in her listeners. Audiences no longer simply admired her technical abilities or nostalgic charm. They felt understood, validated, and less alone in their own struggles, disappointments, and unfulfilled longings. But this newfound artistic freedom and authentic connection came with challenges that she was not equipped to handle independently or successfully. Without studio physicians managing her medications, she began to self-medicate in ways that were even more dangerous and unpredictable than the controlled pharmaceutical regimen she had lived with for so many years. Without studio schedules providing external structure for her days, she struggled with the basic rhythms of eating, sleeping, and working that most people establish naturally during childhood and maintain automatically throughout their lives. Her romantic relationships became increasingly complicated and unstable as she tried to find partners who could understand and support her unique circumstances without either exploiting her vulnerability and fame or attempting to fix problems that were too deep, complex, and long-standing for simple solutions. She married Sidney Luft in 1952, and their relationship was passionate, turbulent, and ultimately unsustainable. He understood the entertainment business and genuinely cared about her well-being, but he couldn't protect her from internal struggles that had been developing and intensifying for decades. They had 2 children together, Lorna and Joey, but Judy's unpredictable health, erratic schedule, and ongoing emotional instability made consistent, nurturing parenting extremely difficult to provide or maintain. The woman who had spent her entire conscious life taking care of other people's emotional needs, financial requirements, and entertainment desires had never learned how to take care of her own most basic physical and psychological needs. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Judy's live performances became legendary throughout the entertainment world for their extraordinary emotional intensity and complete unpredictability. Some nights, she delivered concerts that audiences would remember and discuss for the rest of their lives. Performances where her voice seemed to contain all of human experience, where her presence on stage created a sense of spiritual communion between artist and audience that transcended ordinary entertainment and approached something sacred. Other nights, she struggled to complete her performances, overwhelmed by exhaustion, medication effects, or emotional states that she couldn't predict, control, or manage with any consistency or reliability. But even on her most difficult and challenging nights, something extraordinary and irreplaceable continued to happen between Judy and the people who came to hear her sing. Audiences who attended her concerts during this period often described feeling like they were witnessing something sacred and unrepeatable. Not just a performance, but a form of testimony about what it meant to survive experiences that couldn't be easily categorized, explained, or resolved through conventional means. Her willingness to be completely vulnerable and emotionally available in front of strangers gave other people permission to acknowledge and accept their own wounds, disappointments, and ongoing struggles without shame or pretense. This profound connection with audiences became simultaneously her greatest source of purpose and meaning, and her most devastating emotional burden. She understood that people came to her concerts carrying their own heartaches, traumas, and unfulfilled dreams, looking for someone who could validate their experiences of loss, longing, and the persistent gap between what life had promised them and what it had actually delivered. She felt a deep, almost spiritual responsibility to honor that trust and meet those needs, even when doing so required her to access and expose parts of herself that were already severely damaged by years of being accessed and exposed without adequate protection, recovery time, or emotional support. Her legendary 1961 concert at Carnegie Hall was professionally recorded and released as what many consider one of the greatest live albums in music history. But the performance also demonstrated the enormous physical and emotional energy it required for her to give audiences what they needed and expected from her. By the mid-1960s, the cumulative cost of this level of emotional availability and artistic authenticity was becoming impossible to sustain or survive. Her health problems were mounting and compounding as the long-term effects of decades of prescription drug use intersected with the ongoing stress of financial difficulties, legal battles, custody disputes, and the constant pressure of maintaining relationships and professional commitments under relentless public scrutiny. Her marriage to Sidney Luft had ended in another painful, expensive divorce, and subsequent attempts at romantic relationships consistently struggled under the combined weight of her fame, her health issues, her financial instability, and the fundamental difficulty of building genuine intimacy with someone whose entire existence had been shaped by performing for others. She moved to London in the late 1960s, hoping that geographical distance from Hollywood might provide the physical and emotional space she needed to rebuild her life on more manageable and sustainable terms. But the behavioral patterns, emotional habits, and physical dependencies that had been established during her childhood and adolescence proved extraordinarily resistant to change. Even with professional independence, physical distance from the studio system, and access to different medical and therapeutic resources, the habit of prioritizing other people's needs over her own, the tendency to use work and performance as a way of avoiding personal problems and emotional pain, the reliance on chemical solutions for physical discomfort and psychological distress. These had become so fundamental to her way of existing in the world that changing them felt like losing herself entirely. Her final performances in London were attended by audiences who understood they might be witnessing the end of something that could never be replaced, replicated, or recovered once it was gone. She died on June 22, 1969, at the age of 47 in her London apartment. The official cause of death was listed as an accidental overdose of barbiturates, but the actual cause was much more complex and multifaceted than any medical examiner could capture in an official document or legal record. Judy Garland died from a lifetime of being valued, loved, and compensated more for what she could provide to others than for who she was as a complete, complex, flawed human being deserving of protection, care, and unconditional acceptance. The little girl who had learned at age 2 that her worth and lovability were directly tied to her ability to make strangers happy had grown into a woman who couldn't imagine existing without external validation and approval, even when the cost of earning that validation had become more than her body, mind, and spirit could continue to bear. But what prevents her story from being simply a cautionary tale about child exploitation in the entertainment industry is the extraordinary artistic legacy that emerged directly from her experiences of suffering, survival, and transformation. Her greatest performances contained a quality that cannot be replicated, taught, or manufactured through technique alone: absolute honesty about the complexity, difficulty, and beauty of human existence. She sang about hope and heartbreak with equal conviction and authenticity, because she had experienced both completely and without protection. Her audiences trusted her completely because she never pretended that life was simpler, easier, or more fair than their own experiences had taught them it actually was. The child who never got the opportunity to develop naturally and at her own pace became an adult who could speak directly to the parts of other people that had also been denied adequate protection, nurturing, and time to grow and heal. When she sang Over the Rainbow in her later concerts, the song carried meanings that were completely different from what it had represented when she was 16 years old and performing it for the first time. The longing in her voice was no longer theoretical, scripted, or performed. It was earned, real, and impossible to dismiss or ignore. The world that had initially fallen in love with Dorothy's innocence, optimism, and trust eventually discovered that Judy's hard-won wisdom, resilience, and capacity for authentic emotional expression were actually more valuable and meaningful than any fictional character she could portray. Her legacy extends far beyond the movies, recordings, and performances she left behind. She gave countless people permission to be complicated, wounded, imperfect, and still deserving of love, respect, and recognition. She proved that perfection isn't necessary for greatness, and that sometimes the most important and transformative art emerges from the places that hurt the most. The rainbow she sang about was never meant to be a destination she could actually reach, but rather a symbol of the eternal human longing for something better, kinder, and more beautiful than what we're given. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't that Judy Garland died young, but that she lived so long without anyone asking what she needed to not just survive, but truly flourish and thrive as a human being. The world celebrated her strength, resilience, and ability to keep performing despite impossible circumstances. But nobody thought to question why a child had needed to develop that kind of strength in the first place.